The true measure of a person's character is never revealed under bright lights, but in the moments when they believe no one important is watching. Eleanor Vance knew this better than anyone, a billionaire widow, guardian of a global empire, and steward of a fortune capable of shifting entire markets. Yet her greatest treasure wasn't the billions, but the son she had raised with humility and integrity. So when a woman who seemed almost too perfect stepped into his life, bringing charm, beauty, and a sweetness that felt rehearsed, something cold stirred inside Eleanor. It was the same instinct that had saved her from disastrous partnerships and fraudulent deals. And to protect her son, she was willing to do the unthinkable, hide her name, her wealth, and her identity, just to see who that woman truly was when she believed she was speaking to a nobody. What is the true measure of a person's character? Is it found in their words when they seek to impress, or in their actions when they believe no one of consequence is watching? For one mother, a woman who commanded a global empire, the answer to this question would determine the fate of her family's legacy and the future of her only son. This is the story of a test, a disguise, and a devastating truth that money could not hide. Eleanor Vance was a name whispered with reverence in boardrooms from New York to Tokyo. Alongside her late husband, Robert, she had spent a lifetime transforming a small, ambitious startup into a sprawling conglomerate. Their combined vision and relentless work ethic had built a staggering fortune, a dynasty of assets, stocks, and real estate that placed their net worth firmly in the realm of billionaires. The family's capital was immense, their influence undeniable. But for Eleanor, the true inheritance she cherished was not the endless stream of dollars in their accounts or the glittering portfolio of investments. It was a legacy of integrity, hard work, and humility, forged in the lean years before the wealth ever came. Now, a widow, she lived a life of quiet observation, her sharp mind constantly assessing the world around her, her intuition a finely tuned instrument that had rarely led her astray in business or in life. Her world, however, had one singular vulnerable center, her son, Arthur. He was everything she and Robert had hoped for, kind, compassionate, and utterly devoid of the arrogance that so often accompanies great wealth. He saw the good in people, a quality Eleanor admired but also feared. And recently, Arthur had fallen, deeply and completely, for a woman named Chloe. On the surface, Chloe was perfect. She was beautiful, intelligent, and possessed a charisma that could light up any room. She spoke eloquently of her modest upbringing and her admiration for the Vance family's philanthropic work. Arthur was smitten, already speaking of marriage, of a future, of making Chloe a permanent part of their lives. But beneath the surface of her son's happiness, a cold unease had taken root in Eleanor's heart. It was a feeling she couldn't shake, a subtle dissonance between Chloe's polished words and the fleeting, calculated glances Eleanor would sometimes catch. It was in the way Chloe's eyes would linger a moment too long on a piece of art, her gaze not one of appreciation, but of appraisal. It was a gnawing instinct, the same one that had warned her away from bad business deals and untrustworthy partners. She saw a hunger in Chloe that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with the vast Vance fortune. To challenge Arthur would be to risk alienating him, to drive a wedge between them that might never be repaired. He was blinded by love. Seeing only the flawless facade Chloe presented to the world, Eleanor knew that words would not be enough. She needed proof. She needed to see the real Chloe, the woman who existed when the promise of billions was stripped away. And so, a desperate, high-stakes plan began to form in her mind. She would test her future daughter-in-law in the only way that would reveal the unvarnished truth. She would remove the allure of money, the very thing she suspected Chloe coveted most. Eleanor orchestrated a scenario. She told Arthur she would be traveling abroad for a month, an extended business trip to oversee their European assets. In her absence, she encouraged him to take Chloe to the family's secluded countryside estate, a sprawling property nestled in the hills, far from the prying eyes of society. It was a place of deep, personal significance, where she and Robert had spent their happiest moments, a sanctuary from the demands of their empire. Arthur, thrilled at the idea of a romantic getaway, readily agreed, but Eleanor would not be in Europe. She would be right there, at the estate, waiting for them, not as Eleanor Vance, the billionaire matriarch, but as Helen, the new, humble housekeeper hired to look after the property. It was a daring gamble, a masquerade that would either confirm her darkest fears or, she hoped, prove them wonderfully, blessedly wrong. The stage was set for a month-long confrontation of character, a quiet war to be fought not in a boardroom, but in the hallways of her own home. The day of their arrival was bright and sunny, a cruel irony against the storm brewing in Eleanor's soul. Dressed in a simple grey uniform, her hair pulled back under a scarf, she had spent the morning tending to the rose bushes, deliberately working without gloves to ensure her hands looked the part, roughened and calloused. She watched from a window as Arthur's car crunched up the long gravel driveway. He emerged first, his face lit with the easy joy she loved so much. Then he opened the passenger door, and Chloe stepped out, a vision in a cream-colored cashmere sweater and designer jeans. She looked every bit the part of the future lady of the manor. Arthur's arm went around Chloe's waist as they approached the grand oak doors. "You're going to love it here, Chloe. It's the most peaceful place on earth." Eleanor took a deep breath, steeling herself, and opened the door before they could knock. She kept her eyes downcast, a posture of deference she hadn't assumed in 50 years. "Welcome, Mr. Vance. Miss," she said, her voice carefully modulated to sound weary and plain. "Helen, this is my fiancée." "Chloe," Arthur said, beaming. "Chloe, this is Helen. She'll be looking after us for the month." Chloe's smile, which had been so brilliant for Arthur, faltered as her eyes swept over Eleanor's simple attire. The warmth vanished, replaced by a flicker of something cold and appraising. It was a look Eleanor had seen 1,000 times in the business world, a swift, brutal calculation of status and utility. In an instant, she had been weighed, measured, and dismissed. "A pleasure," Chloe murmured, the words utterly devoid of meaning. She didn't offer her hand. She simply glided past Eleanor into the grand foyer, her gaze already cataloguing the antiques and the artwork, her mind clearly on the vast family assets she was about to inherit. The cruelty began almost immediately, and it was a masterpiece of subtlety. It was never overt enough for Arthur to truly notice. To him, Chloe's remarks were playful jabs. When Eleanor served them their first dinner, Chloe picked at her food and commented, "Oh, darling, isn't it quaint? This is exactly the kind of simple food my grandmother used to make, before she hired a real chef, of course." Arthur chuckled, oblivious. Eleanor just nodded and cleared the plates, her jaw tight. Chloe would leave her expensive clothes strewn across the bedroom floor and then complain to Arthur, within Eleanor's earshot, that the housekeeping was a bit lacking. She made impossible demands, requesting obscure imported teas at 10 o'clock at night and expressing theatrical disappointment when Helen couldn't produce them instantly. Each incident was a small, sharp pinprick, designed to establish dominance and remind the housekeeper of her place. Eleanor endured it all with a quiet, simmering resolve. She was gathering data, compiling a ledger of slights and insults that painted a damning portrait of the woman her son adored. The first true crack in Chloe's carefully constructed facade appeared a few days into their stay. In the main sitting room, on the mantelpiece above the fireplace, sat a small collection of objects Eleanor cherished. Among them was a delicate, unassuming porcelain bird, its wings half spread as if in mid-flight. It wasn't valuable in terms of money. Its worth couldn't be measured in dollars or gold. It was the first gift Robert had ever given her, purchased from a street vendor on their honeymoon with the last of their travel funds. It symbolized the beginning of their shared dream, the foundation upon which their entire fortune was built. Eleanor was dusting in the room when Chloe entered, talking animatedly on her phone. Pacing back and forth, she gestured wildly with her hand, her movements careless and expansive. With a sickening crack, her arms swept across the mantelpiece. The porcelain bird tumbled to the stone hearth below, shattering into a dozen pieces. Chloe ended her call abruptly. "Oops," she said, looking down at the fragments with mild annoyance. Eleanor felt a physical pang in her chest, as if a piece of her own heart had broken. She knelt, her fingers trembling as she touched a shard of the painted wing. "I am so sorry," Chloe said, her tone light and dismissive. She didn't move to help, she just stood there, watching. "Was it valuable? I hope it wasn't some priceless antique." The question hung in the air, thick with everything Eleanor had feared. Chloe's only concern was its monetary value, its line item in the vast inventory of the Vance patrimony. The sentiment, the history, the love infused into that simple object meant nothing to her. It was just a thing. "It was important to Mrs. Vance," Eleanor said, her voice strained as she carefully gathered the pieces. "Well, I'm sure a woman with her kind of wealth can afford to replace it," Chloe replied with a shrug, already turning her attention back to her phone. "Just send the bill to Arthur." In that moment, Eleanor's internal conflict became a raging fire. Every maternal instinct screamed at her to drop the charade, to stand up and expose this cold, calculating woman for what she was. She wanted to protect her son, to save him from a lifetime of hollowness with a partner who could not comprehend the meaning of love or legacy. But then she pictured Arthur's face, the adoration in his eyes when he looked at Chloe, the pure, unadulterated happiness he felt. To reveal the truth now would be to shatter his world as completely as Chloe had shattered that porcelain bird. Staying silent felt like a betrayal of her late husband's memory and a disservice to her son's future. But speaking up felt like an act of emotional violence against the person she loved most in the world. The weight of her billionaire status had never felt heavier, not because of the power it gave her, but because of the terrible choice it now forced her to make. She decided that to save her son, she first had to give Chloe more rope. The estate was a closed environment. She needed to see how this woman operated in the world Eleanor actually commanded, the world of power, influence, and immense capital. A few days later, back in the city for a supposed board meeting, Eleanor set her next trap in motion. She had her assistant call Arthur and extend a formal invitation to the Vance Foundation's annual pre-gala dinner, a highly exclusive event for major donors and board members. The invitation specifically requested the pleasure of his fiancée's company, noting that Mrs. Vance was eager to finally meet the woman who had captured her son's heart. The transformation in Chloe was instantaneous and staggering. The moment Arthur told her the news, her entire demeanor shifted. The bored, contemptuous woman who lounged around the country estate vanished, replaced by a creature of vibrant energy and meticulous planning. She spent days online, ordering designer gowns, scheduling appointments for hair and makeup, and researching the biographies of every single board member of the Vance Foundation. She quizzed Arthur relentlessly about his mother. What are her passions? What charities does she favor? Does she prefer discussions about the arts or the global economy? To Arthur, this was his brilliant fiancée preparing to make a wonderful impression. To Eleanor, listening from the hallway as she pretended to polish silver, it was a predator studying its prey. The night of the dinner, Eleanor shed her housekeeper's disguise and became herself once more. She wore a tailored silk gown in a deep sapphire blue, her silver hair styled elegantly, a simple but breathtaking diamond necklace at her throat, a piece from Robert that was worth more than most people's homes. She was the picture of quiet power and immense wealth. When Arthur and Chloe arrived, Eleanor greeted them with a warm, practiced smile. Chloe was radiant, a vision in emerald green, her hand resting delicately on Arthur's arm. She looked at Eleanor with wide, reverent eyes. "Mrs. Vance," she gushed, her voice filled with a sincerity that was chillingly perfect. "It is an absolute honor to finally meet you. Arthur has told me so much about your incredible work, your vision. You're a true inspiration." Throughout the evening, Chloe was flawless. She navigated the room of billionaires and power brokers with an ease that was astonishing. She charmed the elderly chairman of the board with a discussion on classical music and impressed a tech mogul with her seemingly insightful questions about cryptocurrency investments. When she spoke to Eleanor, she laid the flattery on thick, speaking eloquently about the importance of family, of legacy, and of using one's great fortune to uplift others. The Vance family's commitment to philanthropy isn't just about writing checks, Chloe said, her eyes shining with manufactured earnestness. It's about building a better world. That's a legacy that no stock market fluctuation can ever diminish. Eleanor watched this masterful performance, a cold knot tightening in her stomach. This was the woman her son loved, a chameleon, a brilliant actress playing the role of a lifetime for the greatest prize of all, the Vance inheritance. The duality was jarring, almost dizzying. This charming, sophisticated woman bore no resemblance to the cruel, petty tyrant who had mocked the simple food made by her housekeeper just days before. The confirmation of Chloe's deceit was no longer a fear. It was a horrifying, undeniable fact. The success of the dinner emboldened Chloe. Back at the estate, she began to subtly position herself as an indispensable part of the family's public life. Seeing an opportunity, she offered to help organize the foundation's upcoming annual charity gala, the centerpiece of the Vance family's philanthropic calendar. "Arthur, darling, your mother has so much on her plate," she'd said, feigning concern. "I have some experience in event planning. I would be honored to help, to take some of the burden off her shoulders." Arthur, proud and eager to see her integrated into the family, thought it was a wonderful idea. And so Chloe began to insert herself. She started by assisting the gala's lead planner, but soon she was making decisions, overriding established protocols, and acting as if she were already in charge. One afternoon, a crisis erupted. The finalized, confidential guest list, along with signed contracts from the caterers and entertainers, documents representing millions of dollars in commitments, went missing. Chloe flew into a manufactured panic, turning her suite upside down. Then she delivered her masterstroke. With tears in her eyes, she went to Arthur. I can't believe how careless I was," she sobbed. "I had the folder with everything in it. I was working in the study, and Helen came in to clean. I asked her to put it somewhere safe for me while I took a call." She paused, letting out a heart-wrenching sigh. "She must have misplaced it. Thrown it out with the recycling, maybe. Oh, Arthur, your mother will be furious. This could ruin the entire event." The accusation hung in the air, a poisoned dart aimed directly at Eleanor. Later that evening, Arthur found her in the kitchen. His face was a mask of conflict and disappointment. "Helen," he began, his voice strained. "Chloe told me what happened with the gala documents." He couldn't meet her eyes. "She feels terrible, but she said she gave them to you. We've looked everywhere. Those papers represent a significant portion of the Foundation's capital for the year. We have to find them." Eleanor stood perfectly still, her heart aching not from the false accusation, but from the pained look on her son's face. He was trying to be fair, but she could see it. He believed Chloe. He believed the woman he loved over the humble housekeeper he barely knew. "Mr. Vance," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor she felt inside. "I never saw that folder. Miss Chloe never gave it to me." Arthur sighed, running a hand through his hair. The chasm was opening between them, right there in the quiet of the kitchen. "Look," Helen, I don't want to cause any trouble, but this is a massive problem. Chloe is beside herself. Just try to remember where you might have put it. He turned to leave, his shoulders slumped with the weight of his misplaced loyalty. The painful distance between them felt as vast and cold as the sprawling estate itself. Eleanor stood frozen in the cavernous kitchen long after the sound of Arthur's footsteps had faded. The accusation, so casually delivered, echoed in the silence. It wasn't the lie itself that wounded her so deeply, but the ease with which her son had accepted it. He saw a distraught fiancé and a forgetful housekeeper, and his heart, so full of love, had made its choice. She was no longer his mother in that moment. She was an obstacle, a problem to be managed. The weight of her disguise felt suffocating. She had wanted to see the truth, and now she was seeing it in all its brutal clarity. Chloe's deception was so masterful, it could turn a son against his own mother, even when she stood right in front of him. Of course, the documents weren't truly missing. 2 days later, Chloe made a miraculous discovery. "Oh, thank heavens!" she exclaimed, loud enough for Arthur to hear from the next room. "I found them! Silly me! They must have slipped behind the desk cushion in the study." She produced the folder, looking relieved and slightly embarrassed. "I feel just awful for blaming Helen. My mind has been so frazzled with all this planning." To Arthur, it was a simple mistake, a sign of Chloe's dedication and stress. To Eleanor, it was a chillingly precise maneuver. Chloe hadn't just framed her, she had also reinforced her own image as a slightly overwhelmed but ultimately capable future matriarch, while subtly painting Helen as unreliable and potentially senile. The Foundation's capital was safe, and Chloe was the hero of her own manufactured crisis. But not everyone was blinded by Chloe's performance. David Chen, the head of the Vance family's personal security for over 2 decades, was a man who operated on facts, not charm. He had been hired by Robert Vance himself and possessed an almost fanatical loyalty to the family. From his discreet command center on the estate grounds, he observed everything. He saw the way Chloe's smile never quite reached her eyes when she spoke to the staff. He noted her frequent, hushed phone calls, her tone sharp and anxious, a stark contrast to the sweet, loving voice she used with Arthur. During one of Eleanor's supposed trips back to the city, he requested an urgent and private meeting. They met in a secure office deep within the Vance Tower, a space of polished steel and soundproof glass that felt a world away from the rustic charm of the estate. "Mrs. Vance," David began, his face grim, "I apologize if I'm overstepping, but I am concerned." He laid a simple file on the desk. "I have been monitoring Miss Chloe's activities, as is standard protocol for anyone entering the family's inner circle. There are inconsistencies." He explained that Chloe's stated background of a modest but stable family didn't align with the level of debt he was beginning to uncover, linked to a recently dissolved luxury consulting business she had never mentioned to Arthur. "And her behavior at the estate," he continued, "her treatment of your staff, specifically Helen, it's dismissive, bordering on cruel." Eleanor listened, her expression unreadable. David was one of the few people who knew about her disguise. He had initially advised against it, deeming it too risky, but had ultimately deferred to her judgment. Now, his words were a lifeline in a sea of doubt. "What are you suggesting, David?" she asked, her voice quiet. "And I believe she is a threat not just to Mr. Vance's happiness, but to the family's assets," he said bluntly. "Her interest in the Foundation's finances is unusual. She has requested access to files that are typically reserved for board members. She claims it's to better understand the family's philanthropic investments, but the depth of her inquiries feels more like an audit." Eleanor looked out at the city skyline, the vast empire she and Robert had built. The immense fortune, the billions in dollars and global holdings, had always been a tool to build a better world. not a prize to be won through deceit. "Find out everything, David," she commanded, her voice regaining its familiar steel. "I want to know who she is, where she came from, and what she truly wants. Be discreet. Arthur cannot know." David's investigation began in earnest. He was a ghost, a master of surveillance. He followed Chloe on a trip into the city, where she told Arthur she was meeting an old friend for lunch at a chic restaurant, but she never went to the restaurant. Instead, her taxi took her to a gritty, industrial neighborhood on the edge of town, a place of warehouses and chain-link fences. She got out and walked nervously to a nondescript coffee shop. David watched from across the street as she met a man. He was large, with a hard face and eyes that scanned the room constantly. Their conversation was tense and brief. Chloe slid a thick white envelope across the table. The man opened it, counted the contents, and sneered, shaking his head. He spoke to her in low, menacing tones, his finger jabbing the air for emphasis. Chloe seemed to shrink in her seat, her face pale with fear. From his vantage point, David snapped a series of high-resolution photographs. The images were clear and damning. This was no friendly lunch. This was a transaction, and one that had clearly gone wrong. The unknown man was a predator, and Chloe was his prey. As she left the coffee shop, her composure completely shattered. David knew he had found the first thread, and he had a feeling that if he pulled it, Chloe's entire, carefully woven world would unravel. David didn't wait. He pulled the thread, and the tapestry of Chloe's lies began to fray almost immediately. Within 24 hours, his team had a name for the man in the photographs: Marco the Vice Bellini, a notorious loan shark operating in the city's underbelly, known for his ruthless collection methods. A few more days of digging into financial records and public filings painted an even darker picture. Chloe's luxury consulting business hadn't just failed, it had imploded, leaving behind a mountain of debt. She had personally guaranteed loans from Bellini at exorbitant interest rates. Using her charm to secure capital she had no way of repaying. Her entire life was a house of cards, financed by desperation and on the verge of collapse. Her pursuit of Arthur wasn't just a desire for a life of luxury, it was a frantic bid for survival. Eleanor received David's report in the quiet of her small housekeeper's quarters. As she read the details of Chloe's massive debts and her dealings with a dangerous criminal, a cold sense of clarity washed over her. This was no mere gold digger. Chloe was a cornered animal, and cornered animals were the most dangerous. She now understood the urgency in Chloe's actions, the calculated risks she was taking. She needed the Vance family's immense fortune, and she needed it soon. The knowledge hardened Eleanor's resolve. She needed one more piece of irrefutable proof, an act of pure dishonesty she could present to Arthur, something he couldn't possibly explain away as a misunderstanding. She decided to set a trap that would test not just Chloe's empathy, but her fundamental integrity. The next morning, while Chloe was out riding with Arthur, Eleanor went to her personal safe in the main house. She selected a single diamond earring, a flawless pear-shaped stone that glittered with an inner fire. It was part of a set Robert had given her for their 20th anniversary, an investment in precious gems that was now worth a small fortune. She walked to Chloe's opulent suite and, with a steady hand, dropped the earring near the edge of the plush area rug, partially tucking it under the leg of an antique vanity. It was visible, but not obvious. A perfect lure. Later that afternoon, Eleanor began her cleaning routine in the suite. Chloe was lounging on a chaise, scrolling through her phone. "Helen," she said without looking up, "be a dear and make sure you dust under everything. This old house seems to generate a new layer of filth every hour." Eleanor simply nodded and went about her work. As she vacuumed near the vanity, she made a show of stopping the machine. She bent down, her movements slow and deliberate, and picked up the earring. She held it in her palm, letting the light catch its facets. "Miss Chloe," she said, her voice filled with a carefully rehearsed awe. "I believe you may have dropped this." Chloe's head snapped up. Her eyes widened as she saw the diamond glittering in the housekeeper's rough hand. For a split second, a look of pure, unadulterated greed flashed across her face, so naked and intense it was startling. She snatched the earring from Eleanor's palm. "Where did you find this?" she demanded, her tone sharp and accusatory. "It was on the floor, miss, by the vanity," Eleanor replied softly, keeping her eyes downcast. "I was worried it might get sucked up by the vacuum." Chloe examined the earring, her mind clearly racing. She pocketed it without a word of thanks and waved a dismissive hand. "Fine, you can go now." Eleanor knew the performance was not over. The real show would be for Arthur. That evening, as they sat down for dinner, Chloe waited for the perfect moment. She reached up and touched her earlobe with a theatrical sigh. "Oh, no," she murmured, her voice laced with distress. Arthur immediately looked concerned. "What is it, darling?" "My earring," she said, looking at him with wide, innocent eyes. "One of my diamond earrings is missing, the ones you bought me in Paris." She then turned her gaze toward Eleanor, who was serving the main course. A slow, cruel smile played on her lips. "Actually, I think I know what happened to it." "Helen," she said, her voice suddenly loud and clear, "would you care to explain why you had my earring in your pocket this afternoon?" The accusation landed like a physical blow. Arthur's head whipped around, his expression a mixture of shock and confusion. "What are you talking about, Chloe?" "I'm talking about theft, Arthur," Chloe said, her voice trembling with manufactured outrage. "Your housekeeper tried to steal from me. I caught her with it. She only gave it back because she knew she'd been found out. She probably thought I wouldn't notice one was missing." Eleanor stood frozen, holding the heavy serving platter, her knuckles white. She looked at her son, her heart pleading with him to see through the lie, to recognize the character of the woman he was defending. "Mr. Vance," she said, her voice quiet but firm, "that is not true. I found the earring on the floor and returned it to her immediately." Arthur looked from Chloe's tear-filled eyes to the housekeeper's steady gaze. He was caught in the middle, his loyalty torn. He wanted to believe the woman he loved, the woman who was the center of his world. The alternative was too monstrous to consider. "Helen," he said, his voice heavy with disappointment, "this is a very serious accusation." "It's the truth," Chloe insisted, reaching across the table to grab his hand. "Darling, you can't let her get away with this. Think of the family's assets, the security. We can't have a thief living in the house." The choice was made. Arthur looked at Eleanor, his expression hardening. "I don't want to fire you, Helen, given your age, but I can't ignore this. Consider yourself on probation. One more incident, one more thing out of place, and you're gone." The injustice was a physical weight, pressing down on Eleanor's chest. To be judged a thief in her own home, by her own son, was a pain deeper than any she had ever known. But as she nodded meekly and retreated to the kitchen, the pain began to crystallize into something else, an unbreakable, ice-cold resolve. The game was over. It was time to destroy the queen and save the king from his own blindness. Eleanor returned to her small room, the false accusation echoing in her ears. But the sting of her son's betrayal was already being replaced by the chilling focus of a CEO about to execute a hostile takeover. She picked up a burner phone, one David had provided for emergencies, and dialed his secure number. When he answered, her voice was devoid of emotion, as flat and hard as polished granite. "The probation was the final data point," she said, without preamble. "The test is complete. Now, we move to the next phase. I want you to dismantle her life, David. I want every lie, every debt, every skeleton. I want the kind of proof that leaves no room for doubt, no space for his heart to argue. Find the origins of her debt. Find the people she's burned. I want to know who she was before she decided to become the future Mrs. Vance." David Chen, ever the professional, simply replied, Consider it done. His investigation, already in motion, now accelerated with a new, ruthless efficiency. The trail led him from the loan shark, Marco Bellini, back to the smoldering crater of Chloe's failed business, Elysian Lifestyles. Public records gave him a name, Julian Croft, Chloe's former business partner. It took David's team less than a day to locate him. He wasn't living in a high-rise apartment anymore. He was working as a manager at a mid-range hotel, his life a shadow of what it once was. The meeting took place in a sterile coffee shop, a world away from the luxury Chloe now inhabited. Julian Croft was a man haunted by his past, his face etched with a weary bitterness. Initially, he was reluctant to talk, the wounds still too raw. But when David explained he was working on behalf of a family that Chloe was targeting, a floodgate of anger and regret burst open. "She's not a businesswoman," Julian spat, his hands trembling slightly as he clutched his coffee cup. "She's a parasite. She finds a host and bleeds it dry." He told a story that was tragically familiar. He had provided the initial capital, a significant inheritance from his father, while Chloe brought the vision and the contacts. For a while, it worked. Her charm was an incredible asset, attracting high-net-worth clients and lucrative contracts. But the profits never seemed to match the revenue. "She was siphoning funds from the beginning," Julian explained, his voice cracking. "Creating fake invoices, padding expense reports, moving money into offshore accounts. Small amounts at first, then bigger and bigger. She was funding a lifestyle we hadn't earned yet." He had trusted her completely, blinded by her charisma just as Arthur was now. By the time he discovered the embezzlement, it was too late. The business was insolvent, his entire investment gone, and he was left personally liable for the debts. Chloe had declared bankruptcy, her personal assets cleverly hidden, and simply walked away, leaving him in financial ruin. "She told me no one would ever believe me over her," Julian said, a look of profound defeat in his eyes. And she was right. He slid a worn leather briefcase onto the table and opened it. Inside were stacks of documents, bank statements with highlighted transfers, copies of the fraudulent invoices, printouts of emails where he had confronted her and she had gaslighted him with chilling expertise. It was irrefutable proof of a calculated, predatory crime. "I've held on to this, hoping one day I could get some justice," he said. "She doesn't just want a piece of your family's fortune. She wants to control it. Be careful. She's more ruthless than you can possibly imagine." The evidence from Julian was a bombshell. But what David's cyber forensics team found next was the dagger to the heart. They uncovered a secret social media profile Chloe maintained under an alias, accessible only to a small, curated list of friends. It was her private diary of conquest, a grotesque chronicle of her predatory game. The posts were a nauseating mix of arrogance and contempt. She posted photos of the estate, captioned, "Getting used to the new headquarters. The net worth here could solve world hunger." She shared screenshots of articles about the Vance family's wealth, with her own comments like, "Soon to be my operating capital." But the worst posts were about Arthur. She never used his name. He was her golden ticket, her billionaire Boy Scout, her trust fund teddy bear. In one post, she bragged to her friends, "He's completely hooked," talked about his sainted mother's legacy for an hour straight. "I almost died of boredom, but I just nodded and looked sad. The things a girl has to do to secure a 9-figure inheritance." In another, she posted a selfie of her wearing the diamond earrings Arthur had bought her, the very ones used in the staged theft. The caption read, "Practicing my damsel in distress look." It works on him every single time. He'd believe I was a unicorn if I cried enough. David compiled everything into a single, devastating dossier and delivered it to Eleanor. She read it in her housekeeper's quarters, the simple room, feeling more like a war room with each turn of the page. She saw the bank statements proving the embezzlement. She read the warnings from Julian Croft, She scrolled through the screenshots of the secret profile, Chloe's own words, stripping away the last vestiges of the charming woman her son thought he knew. The pain she had felt before was gone, burned away by a cold, righteous fury. This wasn't about a misguided woman seeking security. This was about a predator who enjoyed the game, who took pleasure in the deception, who saw her son's kindness not as a virtue, but as a pathetic weakness to be exploited. Chloe's plan wasn't just to marry into the Vance fortune, it was to seize control of their entire legacy, a legacy built on the very integrity and love that she so clearly despised. The immense wealth, the billions in assets, the global businesses. To Chloe, they were just chips in a game she was playing, and her son was the biggest chip of all. The final, most devastating piece of evidence came not from a private investigator or a financial report, but from Chloe's own lips, delivered in a moment when she believed she was completely alone. Eleanor was pruning the ivy that climbed the stone wall beneath the master suite's balcony, her hands protected by thick gardening gloves, her presence hidden by the lush foliage. Chloe stepped out onto the balcony, a phone pressed to her ear, her voice a low, conspiratorial murmur that carried clearly in the still afternoon air. "You wouldn't believe it, Trish," Chloe laughed, a sound utterly devoid of warmth. "He's just so earnest. It's almost pathetic." A pause. "Last night, he was going on and on about his mother's legacy and some tacky devotion she had to this place. He honestly thinks I love all this dusty, old-world nonsense." Her voice dripped with contempt. "The moment that ring is on my finger, I'm hiring the best interior designer in New York. We're gutting this place. All this dark wood and heavy drapery, gone. It's going to be my house, not some shrine to a dead woman." Eleanor froze, her shears hovering over a branch. Every word was a shard of ice piercing her heart. It wasn't just about the money, the fortune, or the assets. It was about erasure. Chloe wanted to methodically dismantle and destroy every trace of the life Eleanor and Robert had built, every memory infused into the walls of their home. "And Arthur," Chloe continued, her voice dropping to a theatrical whisper, "he's just the key to the kingdom. A sweet, naive boy holding the keys to a very, very large vault. He's so blinded by, well, by me, he doesn't see a thing. He'd defend me if I told him the sky was green." Her laughter echoed again, sharp and cruel. "Don't worry. Once I'm Mrs. Vance, the old guard will be the first to go. I'll have control of the foundation, the board, everything. His mother's memory will be just that, a memory, a very distant one." The phone call ended, and Chloe went back inside, leaving Eleanor standing in the garden, trembling not with rage, but with a profound and chilling clarity. The full scope of Chloe's ambition was now laid bare. It was a complete conquest. She didn't want to join the Vance family. She wanted to consume it, to replace its history with her own image, to turn its legacy of integrity into a hollow brand she could control. Just as this horrifying realization settled, the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. David Chen called her on the secure line. His team had intercepted a communication to Chloe from Marco Bellini. The loan shark was growing impatient. His message was a blunt instrument of blackmail. He wanted his money, a sum far greater than Chloe could ever produce on her own, within 72 hours. If he didn't get it, he would sell her story, complete with details of her debts and her desperate hunt for a wealthy husband, to the highest media bidder. The deadline was the night of the annual charity gala. Suddenly, Chloe's frantic energy, her obsessive takeover of the gala planning, made perfect sense. The event was no longer just a social climbing opportunity. It was her last, desperate stand. She had positioned herself to give the keynote speech, to be seen by the world as the new, benevolent face of the Vance family's immense capital. She needed that public coronation to secure her position, to make herself too big to fail, too intertwined with the family for Arthur to ever cast her aside, even if her past was exposed. The gala was her shield. Eleanor walked back into the house, no longer a grieving mother or a betrayed woman. She was a general on the eve of a battle she could not afford to lose. The pain was still there, a cold, heavy stone in her chest, but it had been forged into a weapon. She knew what she had to do. The public stage Chloe had so carefully built for her triumph would now become the theater of her downfall. It would be brutal. It would shatter her son's heart and expose their private pain to the world, but it was the only way. It was a terrible, painful, but necessary act of love to save him from a future built on a foundation of pure, predatory deceit. The night of the charity gala arrived, a glittering spectacle held in the city's most prestigious ballroom. The event was a testament to the Vance family's influence, a physical manifestation of a fortune built over a lifetime of hard work and shrewd investment. The room was a sea of glittering gowns and tailored tuxedos, a gathering of the nation's most powerful figures, from tech billionaires who spoke of cryptocurrency and blockchain as the new gold E, to old money families whose wealth was tied up in land, art, and vast stock portfolios. The air buzzed with talk of business, of mergers and acquisitions, of the ever-shifting tides of the global economy. This was the world Chloe had dreamed of, a world where a person's worth was measured in the billions of dollars of their net worth, and she was, for this one night, its radiant queen. She stood near the grand staircase, a vision in a custom-made gown of shimmering silver that must have cost a small fortune in itself. She held a champagne flute, her laughter bright and practiced as she moved through the crowd, charming a senator here, impressing a hedge fund manager there. She spoke of the foundation's work with a fluency that was breathtaking in its insincerity, weaving in phrases about social responsibility and the importance of using one's capital for the greater good. Her performance was flawless, a masterclass in deception. From the front row of tables, Arthur watched her, his heart swelling with a pride so pure it was painful to witness. He saw his future, his partner, a woman who was not only beautiful but brilliant, capable of commanding a room filled with the world's elite. He saw the continuation of his family's legacy secure in her capable hands. He was the happiest man in the world, and he hadn't the faintest idea he was standing at the edge of a cliff. Meanwhile, in the wings, out of sight from the main floor, Eleanor Vance watched the scene unfold on a monitor. She was no longer Helen, the humble housekeeper. She was herself, regal and imposing in a gown of deep crimson silk. Her silver hair was swept up, and around her neck lay the Vindicator diamond, a stone so large and flawless it seemed to drink the light. A piece of her personal collection of assets that was legendary in financial circles. She was not watching with anger or with sadness. Her emotions had been distilled into a single point of cold, sharp focus. She was a general observing the battlefield before the first shot was fired. David Chen stood beside her, his face impassive. "Everything is in place, Mrs. Vance," he said quietly. "The feed is patched into the main projection system. On your signal." Eleanor simply nodded, her eyes fixed on the screen, on the image of Chloe laughing, basking in a spotlight that was about to become an inferno. The moment came. The Foundation's chairman went to the podium and, after a few words, introduced the evening's keynote speaker, and a woman whose passion and dedication have been an incredible asset to this year's gala, the future of the Vance family's philanthropic vision, Miss Chloe Sterling. A wave of polite applause swept through the ballroom. Chloe glided toward the stage, her smile a dazzling beacon of triumph. She looked at Arthur, blew him a small kiss, and stepped up to the microphone. The grand screens behind her, which had been displaying the Foundation's logo, now showed a beautiful, professionally shot photo of her looking thoughtful and benevolent. She began her speech, her voice smooth and confident, echoing through the cavernous hall. She spoke of family, of legacy, of the profound duty that comes with great wealth and the immense inheritance of responsibility. Her son's eyes were filled with tears of pride. The audience was captivated. Chloe was at the absolute peak of her conquest, the culmination of her entire predatory scheme. As she reached the crescendo of her speech, talking about the importance of truth and integrity in building a lasting legacy, Eleanor gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod to David. On the stage, Chloe paused for dramatic effect, ready to deliver her final, inspiring lines. But behind her, the screens flickered, her glamorous photo vanished. The room fell silent as a new image appeared, grainy and stark. It was security footage from the estate's sitting room. The sound of a porcelain bird shattering echoed through the ballroom's perfect acoustics, followed by Chloe's dismissive, careless voice. "Oops! Was it valuable?" The audience gasped, a collective intake of breath. Chloe froze, her smile faltering as she heard her own words. She glanced behind her, a flicker of confusion in her eyes. But it was too late. The unmasking had begun. The image on the screen shifted, replaced by a rapid-fire montage of Chloe's cruelty. There she was, sneering at the simple food Helen had prepared. There she was, making impossible demands with a wave of her hand. And there she was, in the dining room, her voice sharp and loud, accusing the housekeeper of theft as Arthur looked on, conflicted and pained. The polite murmurs in the ballroom died, replaced by a thick, uncomfortable silence. Then the screens went dark, and a single, clear audio recording began to play. It was Chloe's voice from the balcony, a voice the entire room now recognized, dripping with a contempt that was utterly chilling. "He's just so earnest. It's almost pathetic," she laughed. The sound echoed through the hall, a grotesque counterpoint to the elegant surroundings. Arthur, in the front row, flinched as if he'd been struck. His face, once beaming with pride, began to crumble. The recording continued, each word a hammer blow. The moment that ring is on my finger, I'm gutting this place. It's going to be my house, not some shrine to a dead woman." A collective gasp went through the crowd. Arthur's eyes lifted from Chloe's face on the stage to the giant screens, his expression shattering into a million pieces of disbelief and devastation. He was hearing the truth in the one voice he thought he could trust above all others. But the assault was not over. The audio faded and was replaced by a video of a tired-looking man in a simple office. "My name is Julian Croft," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "I was Chloe Sterling's business partner." He proceeded to lay out the entire story of her embezzlement, of how she had systematically drained their company's capital, leaving him in financial ruin. As he spoke, bank statements and fraudulent invoices appeared on the screen next to him. The highlighted figures, a clear and undeniable testament to her crimes. The audience was no longer just shocked, they were horrified. This wasn't a simple faux pas. This was calculated, predatory fraud. The final, most humiliating blow came next. The screens filled with screenshots from a secret social media profile. There was Chloe's face, smirking in a selfie, with captions that exposed the depths of her deception. "He's completely hooked," one read. "See my golden ticket," said another. And then the one that made Arthur physically recoil, a photo of her wearing the diamond earrings with the caption, "Practicing my damsel in distress. Look, it works on him every single time." On the stage, Chloe was a statue carved from ice. The color had drained from her face, leaving a mask of pure terror. The dazzling smile was gone, replaced by the slack-jawed horror of a cornered animal. The hundreds of phones in the audience were all pointed at her, their lenses like a firing squad. Her dream, her grand stage, had become her public execution. At that precise moment, a figure in crimson silk emerged from the wings. Eleanor Vance walked calmly onto the stage, her presence radiating an authority that silenced the rising chaos. She didn't look at Chloe. She didn't look at the stunned audience. She walked directly to the microphone, took it from its stand, and turned her gaze to her son. Her voice, when she spoke, was not raised. It was quiet, clear, and carried the weight of a lifetime of integrity. "Character," she said, her eyes locked on Arthur's, "is what you are in the dark." She paused, letting the words settle over the stunned ballroom. Then she turned her gaze slightly, finally acknowledging the shell-shocked woman standing beside her. "For the past month, I have had the privilege of seeing a person's true character when they believed no one of consequence was watching." She looked back at the crowd, at the sea of powerful faces. "Because for the past month, I have not only been the CEO of the Vance Corporation, I've also been Helen, the housekeeper at my own estate." The final revelation landed with the force of a physical shockwave. Chloe let out a small, strangled gasp, her entire body trembling. The connection was made. The entire web of her deceit laid bare and illuminated by the harshest light imaginable. She was ruined, utterly and completely, not by a rival or an enemy, but by the quiet, unassuming woman she had deemed worthless. The story ends not with a triumphant celebration, but in the quiet, somber aftermath of a necessary war. Chloe vanished from the stage, swallowed by the scandal she had created. Arthur sat motionless, his world shattered. The love he felt now a source of profound, agonizing pain. He was heartbroken, but for the first time in months, his eyes were wide open. Eleanor had saved him. She had protected the vast fortune, the global businesses, and the billions in assets they controlled. More importantly, she had protected their true legacy, one built on honor, not on avarice. But the victory was undeniably bittersweet. It had been achieved at the cost of her son's innocence, a wound that would take a long time to heal. It was a testament to a mother's unyielding strength, a painful but profound act of love to protect her child from a future built on a foundation of lies. What do you think of this mother's difficult choice? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more content that will make you think. Thank you for watching.